The night is always darkest before the dawn. We often associate mornings with a fresh start. Once the sun begins to peek its face onto the horizon and its rays of light wash over the earth, the dangers and anxieties of the night begin to fade away, and the danger that lurks in the darkness begins to retreat. But what most people might not think about is that beyond the safety of the sun, the new opportunities that come with a new day, also comes a reveal. The curtain being pulled back of just what happens in the dark. Early in the morning at a local church, a lone resident of a small Texas town enters, ready for their morning exercise. But unlike most mornings, there's something off about this one. The doors of the church are unlocked. The halls are quiet, but not lonely. And only when it's too late does the woman who has entered realize that that feeling is true. Someone beat her there. But not a parishioner, not a priest, nor a friend. A figure in full tactical gear, hammer in hand, waiting. Terry Missy Bevers was a 45-year-old fitness instructor and the mother of 3 children. She resided in the sleepy suburbs of Midholton, Texas, where she was a well-known local who ran the Gladiator program, an exercise boot camp of sorts built on the idea of bettering your life through hard work and discipline. It was seemingly a normal day for her to arrive at her church, ready to set up for her 5 a.m. classes, a normal and quiet routine not unfamiliar to millions of Americans across the country. But on April 18th, 2016, that seemingly normal and mundane routine would forever be broken. Church security cameras tell the story. At 3:50 a.m., a mysterious figure appears, dressed head to toe in tactical gear. He wanders the halls, smashing glass doors with his hammer, prying at drawers. There's no rush and no purpose. It's just a typical case of vandalism. But where things go from a pathetic case of criminality into the gruesome and disgusting is when Missy enters the building, not knowing the fate that was about to befall her. And that's when they both wander off camera, and the rest is history. Missy's students found her body at 5 a.m. sharp when class was supposed to start. Frenzied bludgeoning to her head and chest, massive trauma, skull fractures, defensive wounds. It was a scene that no person should ever have to behold. But as horrible as this is, the most puzzling aspect of the situation is that the murderer left without anything else. Just petty vandalism and a body left in his wake. There was no robbery, no sexual assault, no actions to indicate anything aside from an act of senseless violence. Outside of the video evidence from the church's security cameras and the destruction left in his wake, no evidence, DNA, or anything that could give a true lead was ever found. All original suspects were cleared with alibis, and now in 2026, 10 years later, the case has been left cold, with almost no new developments and no answers to any of our questions. All we're left with is a haunting situation caught on camera, and one less human being walking the earth. The mystery of a motive, the mystery of an identity, and the lack of a real motive are what makes cases like this so eerie to look at. Because when there's nothing there to latch onto, our minds are left to wander onto the worst possible situation. And in a world full of chaos, of senseless violence, there's almost nothing as chilling as an act of human brutality. Ancient mysticism, cold cases, and oddities that leave you feeling like something is wrong. These are the types of things that many of us like to immerse ourselves in. The internet is a place that we associate today with the boring and mundane, doom scrolling on social media and desperately searching for something to entertain ourselves with. Topics such as true crime and paranormal activity are nothing new either. They've entertained us for centuries, be it through old folk tales, sightings of cryptids, or theorizing on just who really was Jack the Ripper. And now, in the internet age, we often make up our own horror stories, whether it be through the lens of an amateur writer posting a haunted video game creepypasta, or an elaborate and immersive ARG, unraveling a horror story to us through puzzles and mixed media uploads. But if there is anything that cuts to the core of our love of the macabre and the terrifying, it's our newfound and rejuvenated fascination in the age-old take of an unsolved mystery. Be it a small-time hoax, the tale of someone vanishing off the face of the earth, or a cold case of a murder, still unsolved decades later. So, dear viewer, why don't we take some time to delve into the deep waters that make up the unsolved mysteries that keep us up at night?
So did you listen truth?
The year is 1995. The Sony PlayStation is enjoying its first year on the market in Japan, and eagerly waiting for its release in North America, evolving the video game industry to technical heights never seen before. Across the pond in America, Marilyn Manson is starting to hit the mainstream after his cover of a famous 80s track titled Sweet Dreams hits the airwaves, taking the once underground shock rocker from an obscure artist to a mainstream menace who will terrorize the music industry for decades to come. And up in one of the quiet corners of America sits a young broadcaster, a charismatic morning news anchor at the KIMT TV in Mason City, Iowa, keeping her little town updated on the latest. Until one day, when she doesn't show up for work, and in a week's time, becomes one of the very headlines she used to read.
A new $25,000 award is being offered for help in finding the remains of an Iowa morning news anchor who disappeared more than 27 years ago. Jody Huizentrout disappeared early the morning of June 27, 1995, on her way to work at KIMT TV in Mason City. Police found signs of a struggle outside her apartment. Investigators believe someone kidnapped her, but they've never named a suspect, and her body was never found.
The tale of Jody Huizentrout is one that's rattled America for decades. Abductions and vanishing acts are actually a lot more common than most of us would like to think about. But the reason we don't is because typically they're the fates of those with no voice, people who are unseen, and individuals that aren't known outside their immediate family and friends. This is mostly due to the risk the crime carries. Going for a big fish is risky business, and with a high-profile case comes the bigger risk of getting caught, as you have more than just police looking for clues, but also the public at large. So when a high-profile case such as this pops up, they tend to be a big deal. Jody Huizentrout's rise to fame may have only come after she disappeared, but her local celebrity was actually pretty large. She was a news anchor local to the Mason City, Iowa area, and she had spent years in the public eye, making her a strange target to choose. Even stranger though, was the fact that for the most part, what people knew of Jodi was her kind and likable personality. She wasn't someone who aimed for shock value or attempted to build notoriety through outrage. Even her personal life was relatively normal, just a small-town girl growing up in Minnesota. Outside of her work, she was an avid golfer, with her previous career only being that of a flight attendant for a short stint of time. And in the years leading up to her disappearance, she showed off a happy and warm demeanor to the public, leaving no real suspicion that there was anything wrong going on in the background. But as with just about anyone, what someone shows the public and what the reality of someone's life really is behind the curtain can be two very different things. Come June 27th, 1995, a normal day would begin with Jodi being late for work. Around 4:10 a.m., Jodi's producer would call her to see if she was okay, with Jodi herself saying that she had just overslept and would be rushing into the studio. But after 2 more hours had passed and Jodi still hadn't shown to work, her coworkers would end up calling the police to check up on her. But once the police arrived, the call went from a simple wellness check to a full-blown investigation. Jodi's apartment was vacant, and her car was still in the parking lot. But the lot itself was a distressing scene to behold. Scattered around was many of her belongings. Her red high heels lay kicked off on the ground. A hairdryer and can of hairspray was scattered on the asphalt, and her car key broken and bent in the lock, as if someone had yanked it out in a frenzy. But most distressingly, drag marks were found, etched across the asphalt, a clear sign of struggle. Upon further investigation, Jodi's neighbors would report to the police that they had heard screaming that morning. One claimed to even see a white Ford Ecoline van idling nearby, one they were not familiar with. A scene like this, as awful as it may be, would normally be a good sign because it's a fertile ground for clues, DNA evidence, or even a place to find an item dropped by the kidnapper during the struggle. But this time, that wasn't the case. Nothing was found aside from a lone palm print that couldn't be identified, quickly leading to the investigation going cold. After a few months passed by, Jodi's family would end up hiring private investigators, unhappy with the progress the police had made. And as the months would go on, growing interest in the case would become national news, with big shows like America's Most Wanted even covering it, bringing an even bigger spotlight to Jodi and what happened to her. But alas, no real progress would end up being made. And nearly a year later, a search party, one last hurrah, would scour the area and search for any clues or signs that could give them some sort of lead. But just as all efforts before, no new information and no new clues were found. As the year 2001 would mark the 6th year of her disappearance, Jodi would legally be declared dead. But this would be far from the end of people looking into what had happened. But with that being said, nearly all speculation about what could have happened to Jodi is just that, speculation. Some people would theorize that this could have been a coordinated effort, as one of Jodi's coworkers would tell police that a few months back a black van had followed her, but this would also lead to no real clues. Over a decade later in 2008, 84 pages of Jodi's journal would be photocopied and sent anonymously to a local newspaper. But after a short time, the anonymous sender would reveal themselves to be Cheryl Ellingson, the wife of the former MCPD chief. This was extremely suspicious because why would Cheryl, or David Ellingson for that matter, be in personal possession of possible evidence? This would prompt an investigation, but again, nothing would come about it. Though David and Cheryl are far from the only people who have been suspected to having something to do with the disappearance. The most famous suspect would be a man named John Vances. He was a friend of Jodi's that claimed to be the last to see her alive, and even claimed to be a quote-unquote admirer of her. His behavior held red flags to say the least, and he would eventually be taken in by the police to do a polygraph test. A famous but not very accurate exam used to detect if people are lying. He would end up passing, but suspicion would continue to follow him until the end of his life, without any new real developments arising. Yet another suspect was a man named Tony Jackson, a convicted serial rapist who lived just 2 blocks away from KIMT Studios in 1995. His criminal history was the main reason he was a person of interest early on into the investigation. But police would find no real connection to him and Jodi, his proximity and criminal past being the only real links possible. As decades have come to pass, the only 2 other names of note would be a man named Christopher Revick and a man named Brad Millerbrand. They would come up as possible suspects, but again, no substantial evidence would link them to Jodi, and again, the case would remain cold. It's now been 30 years since the disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit, and it's one of those disappearances that continues to haunt those who look into it. Because outside of when she vanished and the belongings that she left behind, that's all we really know. The only people who possibly could know the truth of what happened to Jodi is herself and her kidnapper.
Planet Isles Lighthouse.
There's something deeply melancholic about lighthouses. They can represent quite a few things. They can warn of danger and coasts unfit for transport. They can be beacons of salvation in times of disorder and confusion. They can also act as guides for safe entry into ports. These structures have been used for centuries as guides and warnings to travelers and sailors alike, going back centuries in history, always acting as somewhat of a guardian angel to the many people who take on the danger and risk of crossing the ocean, or even just transporting people across large lakes. And while they're positive in nature, acting as signs of life and civilization, lighthouses are also deeply depressing. These structures are often remote, small little buildings far away from society, separated from the rest of the world. While mainland workers can easily come and go, those stationed on islands or more remote areas would often spend months of their time in these little buildings, going for long periods of time in extreme isolation. This is why movies such as The Vanishing and The Lighthouse have become such beloved staples of psychological horror. Because when you really think about what it's like to be all alone, cut off from the outside world for months at a time, surrounded by nothing but the harshest oceans and waves imaginable, it's the kind of thing that makes you really think about what it's like to stare into the abyss and have it stare back at you. In December of 1900, on the remote rocky outcrop of Eilean Moor in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse would become a real-life reminder of just how daunting the life of a lighthouse keeper could really be. Newly operational since 1899, it stood as a solitary beacon against the ferocious Atlantic. 3 experienced keepers would man the station, each taking shifts on shore duty, keeping the lights spinning day and night. And for the most part, all seemed normal, all seemed routine, until one fateful December night, where all 3 men would vanish without a trace. Passing ships would be the first to sound the alarm, as they noticed that there was no light coming during the dark, stormy weather on the night of December 15th. It was a telling sign of what was to come, as not long after, some relief keepers would be sent to the island to investigate the lighthouse, only to find the eerie sight of an empty building. The two men climbed the steep 160 steps to the compound and found that the lighthouse was eerily abandoned. The entrance gate and the main door were closed, but inside, the kitchen table held a half-eaten meal. A chair laid overturned, beds were unmade, and the kitchen clock had stopped. Though the strangest part of it all was that, of the 3 oilskin coats, only 2 were missing from their hooks, meaning one of the 3 men went without their coat into the harsh winter cold. There was no bodies to be found, no workers hiding in the basement. There was nothing. And as the investigation went on, everything just seemed routine. The morning duties had been done. Almost nothing was out of place aside from the coat. And when looking through the log entries, they were dated on the 13th of December as well as the 14th and 15th. No frantic messages appeared. No writings of any imminent danger or threats were recorded. Contrary to many of the later urban legends of storms, prayers, and madness that would inspire some of the previously mentioned films, there was nothing out of the ordinary, which only made the situation that much more bizarre. Upon completion of the official investigation by the Northern Lighthouse Board, they concluded that the men must have been swept away by a massive rogue wave while securing equipment at the West Landing. Some of the evidence here included some twisted iron railings, displaced heavy stones, and a life buoy torn from its ropes. A fate not as surprising as it may seem. But where it all leaves much to be desired is in the details. Because if this was a routine panic and run from the threat of the ocean, then why were all 3 left without full gear? Why were no bodies or wreckage ever washed up on the shore or floating on the coast? Why was there no sign of struggle or panic in the lighthouse? In the years since this happened, there's been countless theories and speculations made about just what fate happened to the lighthouse keepers, just like any other haunting disappearance. But the horror here lies in the unanswered questions. Were the 3 men just swallowed by the unforgiving jaws of the sea, or did a fate far stranger befall them? Questions that, as the years go by, become ever more pressing.
Evil Stick.
Imagine life when you were a kid. Back when you were just 9 years old, wide-eyed and giddy because your mom brought you to the dollar store. Typically these trips are nothing special, just getting some snacks or cheap household items. An occasional chore that you get dragged along to. But the discount shop is a place that you always look forward to going, because every time you do, you get to walk out with a shiny new toy. A little ritual that makes the hustle and bustle feel worth it. But not all horror lurks in the dark. Some hide in the toy aisle, flooded with fluorescent lighting, waiting for innocent hands to take them home. Just to unpack it and see this. A haunting and disgusting image, never meant for a child's eyes.
A disturbing image hidden inside a toy purchased at a local dollar store.
News Center 7's Lauren Clark with why a Kettering mother wants it off the shelves. A mother bought her toddler this princess wand at the dollar store behind me. Imagine her surprise when the curious little girl peeled back the foil to find this image of a girl cutting herself inside.
Traumatizing imagery being shown to children is nothing new. But most of the time, it sits in such things like video games and movies, where sometimes the themes are just a little bit too mature or grotesque for children, or maybe it's something that introduces a harsh reality that many children just aren't used to experiencing yet. And with toys in particular, those that aren't meant for children but get approved are not really a rarity. Whether it be the shin-destroying moon shoes of the 1990s, or science kits from the 1950s, with actual radioactive pieces inside of the kit. But at least in this case, it's a bit different. The evil stick is something else entirely. It looks like your typical hunk of junk, a plasticky magic wand with a mirror made of foil on it. The generic packaging, while it should ring alarm bells due to just how bootleg it looks, ironically makes it seem even more passive, like the exact kind of cheap toy we expect to see in a dollar store, with an obviously plagiarized anime girl on the cover, completely unrelated to the toy itself, and that unassuming logo and generic pink background further giving off a harmless and tacky presentation. But it's when the toy is out of its packaging and the foil is removed when we see the evil revealed to us. A grotesque picture of a demon-possessed woman carving herself up. Where the mystery lies here is how and why this ended up in the kids' toy section of a general store. As messed up as it is, gag toys like this aren't too strange when marketed and sold to adults, even if they can be a bit grotesque at times. But putting this out for children, that's an entirely different story. Laws and regulations on both advertising and the kind of products that are allowed to be sold to children are pretty steep. So something like this slipping through the cracks is highly intentional. When this whole thing popped off, the story at the time resulted in a lackluster investigation where not much was found. There was almost no background discovered on who actually manufactured this thing, other than there were other variants that were a lot more tame in comparison to the one that sparked the controversy. If we take a look at them, they look pretty normal. They seem to be your kind of typical kitty sort of monster images that you would see on toys. A massive contrast to the obviously far more violent picture we saw in the other wands. Other YouTubers like Scare Theater, who covered this story back when it happened, would theorize that this was actually just a prank done by people not connected with the manufacturer. And while that could be true, the actual manufacturer is still unknown to this day, as no indication was ever given on the packaging. And when people questioned the store owner, he would claim to not really know himself, stating it was provided by some random distributor. And not long after that, the story would go cold, as there really wasn't much to go off of. But I find this theory to be lackluster because who is the prank really on? And in the case of the store owner, what kind of risk would you want to run by putting something like that in your children's toys? And while this mystery is far less horrific or intense than many of the others that we've covered, it's still one that leaves a lot of uncomfortable questions linger in your mind, especially since it's a situation that involves children, echoing the fears parents used to have about trick-or-treating and someone hiding razor blades in a Snickers bar. But the evil stick is far from the only children's toy that's been discovered to have some nefarious intentions. Just 2 years after this controversy, one that was a bit more disturbing would arrive, when a toy truck would be recalled after a father discovered a peculiar symbol on the toy. A little pink heart. Something that should be as harmless and mundane as the toy it was printed on. But upon closer inspection, It actually ended up being a symbol used by pedophiles to signal their attraction to little girls. A symbol that's been listed on the FBI's database for decades, and one well known for the disgusting implications that it holds. But I guess that begs the question, how do we know what's intentional and what's an honest mistake? And what else hides behind our everyday purchases? The evil stick is a reminder that innocence can mask evil. But the true horror is in the question, who hides evil to be found by the innocent?
A monster with 21 faces.
Monsters are the types of creatures that we all fantasize about, either in our nightmares as our tormentors, or in our daydreams as those things we get to triumph over. And for a select few of us, they are the dragons that we chase in the real world, like junkies looking for a fix. We salivate at the idea of uncovering evidence of some kind of cryptid, digging up the remains of a giant, or finally capturing a photo of an unknown beast in the woods. But in the real world, when safety fades and our grandiosity has fled, we're faced with the fact that real monsters do exist, and oftentimes they don't look nearly as fantastical or marvelous as what we envisioned in our minds.
I don't even know why I'm wasting my breath, but what the hell? You maggots make me sick. Hypocrites one and all. I need to hear all of society's rationalization. I've heard them all before, and the fact remains that what is. You don't understand me. You are not expected to. You are not capable of. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil. Legions of the night, night degree. Repeat not the errors of Nightcrawler and show no mercy. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells within us all.
March 18th, 1984, in the Osaka suburbs, Katsusai Iezaki, the president of Iezaki Gilco, a candy company, is going out on his typical evening activities. As he bathes his day's troubles away, two masked men burst in at gunpoint, where they brutalize and kidnap him. A ransom is demanded, 1 billion yen, and 100 kilograms of gold bars. The identity of his captors are unknown. In a matter of days, Izakai is able to escape, dazed, confused, and barefoot from the clutches of his takers. And while the investigation went on, it seemed like the incident was over. A high-profile ransom case by those just eager to make money any way they could. But if that was the end of things, then we wouldn't be talking about it here. Come April 18th, things would escalate. An arson attack would take place at the Gilco HQ, burning several vehicles with other crimes targeting employees. And soon after this, the case would change forever. Letters would begin to appear, first to Iezaki, from someone claiming to be the monster with 21 faces, telling him his candies had been laced with poison, leading to police investigating the sweets and later pushing the company to pull a recall. A move that not only risked the brand's PR, but the public at risk. It also came at the cost of a full recall, putting the candy giant out over $20 million and resulting in some pretty steep layoffs. These attacks would continue and show a level of precision and forethought beyond petty criminality, or even typical gang violence for that matter. And in a similar behavior as our own homegrown monster here in America, the unsolved killer known as the Zodiac. The monster with 21 faces would also begin to taunt the police with letters. To Yoshino of Hyoga Police Department. You saw our challenge, right? What I'm telling you is for your own good. Stop door-to-door investigations, and more policemen on the streets on weekends. It's pointless. There's no point in investigating objects left behind. We won't be found by objects. You understand this by now, right? You have to catch us in the act. On the 14th of July, you were pitiful. What on earth was that investigation? You really didn't improve in the last 10 years. You've got a little better since Marudai and Moriguchi, though. But you won't catch us like that. Media won't stay silent forever. They're getting annoyed. We're training you, police, by pretending to get fooled. Be thankful. We love police the most. Masuda and Yoshino, who graduated at Tokyo University, cannot catch us. If you don't change executives to people with more experience, you'll never catch us. We helped you so much so far. You can't face House because you're ashamed. We won't send this letter to the media. One more favor from us. Sending letters to the police is risky business because any bit of DNA evidence or a fingerprint could lead to the end of any crime spree. But that's also where a lot of the horror of the situation lies. These people, or this man, felt like they were able to do whatever they wanted, even taunting the police chief to their face, knowing there was nothing they could do to catch them, and no evidence would be left behind. And these sort of activities would only continue, with the monster beginning to move to different companies to terrorize. They would settle on the Moringa Candy Company as well as the House Food Corporation, and this would lead to more tampering of products and more sending of letters. Panic around candy and food items began to rise in Japan as people feared ending up with laced candies, and frustration and criticism of the police and their inability to seemingly do anything about the situation would only continue to mount. So while the police would ramp up their investigation, all they would really find is what the poison was. A sodium cyanide of sorts. But outside of that, nothing else would really be found. And the monster would continue to torment the police and companies alike from the shadows, leaving not a single trace of their identity. Even when the police would give in to the ransom demands, attempting to use it as a ploy to unveil the monster's face, it would fail, leaving the money on a train with a police officer looking to see who would pick up the drop. Nothing came from this either. There was one man who was noted as acting suspicious, but all that was jotted down was that he had an athletic build and had the eyes of a fox, with this sketch being all that they had. He would escape the train, avoiding arrest. For a year and a half, the monster with 21 faces would terrorize the entirety of Japan, leaving millions in fear and causing millions of dollars in damages to the companies that they harassed. It was, in all honesty, one of the most impressive criminal campaigns ever seen. But it wouldn't come without at least one casualty. The monster would finally retire after indirectly claiming a victim, when one of the officers assigned to catching them would end up committing suicide, setting himself on fire after failing to make any progress on the case and capture those responsible. This would result in one final letter from the monster, where they taunted the police, mocking them for failing to solve the case, but relenting that they would finally stop tormenting food companies, and telling them that any future events similar would just be copycats trying to do what they had done. And after this letter, the monster would begin to fade from existence, as if they had never existed, and the Japanese police would close the case, cold with no answers. The monster with 21 faces is one of the most horrifying unsolved mysteries out there, because it's not just some crazed killer, a random act of violence, or some spooky creature unknown to humanity hiding out there in the dark of the woods. Rather, the monster with 21 faces is a suburban nightmare come to life. A monster that preys on the innocent by poisoning something as harmless as an unassuming candy, using the lives of children and civilians to get what they wanted, all while doing so in a calculated and surgical way. So much so that they felt confident enough to taunt the police directly to their face without any risk of being found out. They truly lived up to the name of a monster. Alright, it's time to talk about the Wall of Shame, the place where I put all the names of my lovely little patrons and coffee supporters. These are the people who financially blackmail me into continuing to make videos on this channel, and I just can't thank them enough. Their support means the world to me, and it's just kind of crazy to me still, after a few years of doing this, that there's people who will actually pay to get me to make content, and hey, I'm not complaining. If you'd like to join them, and I beg you to do so, because, I want to escape the perils of employment and join the Legion of the Unemployed. But all jokes aside, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do so is, well, number one, sharing the videos around, but two, becoming a patron. And if you want to do a one-time donation, coffee is an option as well, and the links for both are in my description. You'll get a handful of perks, nothing too crazy, just sneak previews of videos and thumbnails, updates, and personal musings from myself. And hopefully soon, I want to start doing some exclusive videos, but I'm still figuring that portion out. Time is a factor, and doing full-time work on both YouTube, to the degree that I do, as well as a day job that's a little over full-time, I'm sure you understand my plight, but we'll get there when we get there. But anyway, if you want to support, links are in the description. Your name will be up here with everyone else's, and you can feel good knowing that you're helping some poor schmuck out. But that being said, I had a lot of fun making this one. I meant to make this a quarterly series last year, and ended up just getting caught in a tidal wave of algorithmic hell and trying to find my way out of it, and just kind of getting sidetracked. So this year, going forward, the Unsolved Mysteries series will be a quarterly series. So every 3 months or so, at least once per season, you'll get a new one of these videos. They're a lot of fun to make. They're a good break from the media analysis stuff, and a lot of the things that take, I guess, a bit more time. These are a little easier to research and put together since there's a lot less analysis involved, and all the all the referencing of like books and article write-ups and this, that, and the other. These are a bit more straightforward, and like I said, they're just a lot more fun to kind of work with because of that. I get to play the role of a storyteller a lot more, and I do enjoy that quite a bit. So with all that being said, thank you for watching, and support me on Patreon, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter, join the Discord, boys. It's free for now. That will become paywalled eventually, but for now it's free. So with that being said, I hope you guys are having a fantastic beginning of your 2026. We are entering February, so let's enjoy the shortest month of the year, huh? But anyway, I'll see you in the next video.